Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah,
It's all about compliance and change management. You hear a lot about compliance and, rules and regulations, but what happens when a company is actually going through like a big transition, maybe a merger or they're launching a new product or something? That's where things get really interesting. And that's where I think a lot of people don't realize how crucial this whole compliance piece is.
yeah, it's really about how companies stay safe and actually thrive during those big transitions. It's not just about avoiding those, scary fines and legal trouble. It's really a much bigger picture than that.
Okay, so walk me through this. What kind of changes are we really talking about here?
So you've got your big mergers, right? When two companies become one, you've got product launches, maybe you're going into a whole new market, and even just, adopting new technologies. Like when cloud computing became a thing, that was huge for compliance.
Right, because all of a sudden there are all these new rules to follow.
Exactly. And the thing is, if you miss a step or two, it can have some pretty serious consequences.
Okay, give me like a real world example because I think a lot of people, myself included, might think, oh, compliance, whatever. But you're saying it's a lot more than that.
Oh, yeah. So imagine a company that's just like, totally focused on growth, right? They're expanding super fast, going into a new market, launching a new product. They're so excited to get things up and running. They kind of forget about the whole compliance part.
Uh-oh.
And boom, they missed some like crucial data privacy law in that new region. Suddenly, they've got lawsuits, fines that are just astronomical. Their reputation is just shot.
All because they didn't think about compliance from the start.
Exactly. And it's not just like, those external factors,
Mm.
laws changing or new markets. It's internal stuff too.
Like
Restructuring. Let's say a company reorganizes.
Mm.
Departments are shifting. People have new responsibilities. All of a sudden, it's like, wait, who's supposed to be doing what?
Yeah, and that's where things slip through the cracks.
Right. And those cracks can be expensive, especially if it has to do with, sensitive data or financial reporting.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So you've got the pressure from, outside, like the laws and regulations, and then you've got the pressure from inside the company. But there's one other thing, right, that we haven't even talked about yet.
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about vendors.
Oh, right, vendors. Because everyone uses third-party vendors now, especially with all the technology out there.
And it's another whole layer of compliance.
Like, how so?
Well, imagine, okay, there's a merger, right? Two companies come together. Now they've got to integrate all their systems, like their software. Got to make
Yeah.
sure all those vendors, especially the ones handling like super sensitive data, are meeting all the security and compliance standards.
Oh, so even if the company itself is doing everything right, if one of their vendors messes up.
It can all fall apart. One weak link and boom, there's a data breach.
So you've got all this pressure from the outside, from the inside, from vendors. And you were saying earlier something about oversight fatigue. Can you explain that a little more?
Basically, it's when compliance professionals are just like stretched so thin. They're dealing with so many things changing, so many moving parts that they're just exhausted and they start missing things.
I mean, they're only human, right?
Exactly. And when you've got new regulations all the time, policies changing, the whole business world is just moving so fast. It's no wonder they get overwhelmed.
Sounds like a recipe for burnout.
It can be. That's why it's so important to have, the right tools, the right strategies, and the right support. It's not about expecting them to be superhuman. It's about giving them what they need to do their job.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are those tools and strategies? Where do you even begin with all of this?
You always start with a strong foundation, right?
Hmm.
So that means having a set of policies and frameworks, clear, up to date, and they have to reflect the current, legal and regulatory landscape, but also the company's own internal standards.
Okay, that makes sense. But sometimes it feels like those policies are just like static documents.
Well, yeah, they need to be documented,
Yeah.
but they can't be set in stone, right?
Right.
The business world is constantly evolving, regulations change, new things come up all the time. So those policies need to be flexible, adaptable.
So you need a balance, like clear guidelines, but also the ability to adapt those guidelines as needed.
Exactly. And luckily, there are, frameworks out there to help companies build that kind of adaptability. One example is COS.
CSO, I've heard that, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, it stands for Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission.
Right, okay. But what does that actually mean?
It's basically a framework for managing risk, and it's become like the gold standard for building those internal controls.
So it's not just about compliance, it's about looking at risk in general for the whole company.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, thinking ahead, and figuring out how to manage those risks before they become, big problems.
Okay, so it's like having a roadmap, even when you're not sure exactly where you're going.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
But policies and frameworks are just, part of the picture, right? We can't forget about technology.
Oh, right. Technology's got to play a huge role here.
Oh, absolutely. It's a game changer for compliance officers. I mean, we've got GRC tools now.
GRC.
Governance, risk, and compliance. There are software platforms that help automate a lot of the compliance processes, track data, monitor risks in real time.
Whoa, wait. Real-time monitoring. That sounds pretty high-tech.
It is. Imagine having like a dashboard, right?
Yeah.
And it shows you all these key metrics for your organization. Everything from like how well people are following policies to the compliance status of your vendors to potential risks.
So you can see where things might be going wrong before they actually go wrong.
Exactly. Early detection is key. And with AI now, these tools are getting even more powerful.
Wait, AI is involved in compliance now, too.
Oh, yeah. It can analyze tons of data, identify patterns, predict risks, even suggest solutions. It's like having a super smart assistant.
That's amazing. So you've got the policies, you've got the tech tools, but at the end of the day, it's still about people, right?
Absolutely. People are at the heart of any compliance program, and that's why training is so important, especially when a company is going through all these changes.
So it's not just about telling people what the rules are, it's about helping them understand why those rules matter.
Right. And connecting it to their jobs, showing them how compliance actually helps the company succeed.
And that training shouldn't just be a one-time thing, right?
Definitely not. It's
Yeah.
got to be ongoing, and it has to be tailored to whatever changes are happening in the company.
And it's not just for employees, is it?
Nope. Think about all the people interacting with your company. Vendors, contractors, partners. They all need to know what your expectations are, how their actions can impact the company.
Wow. Okay. So it's really about creating this whole culture of awareness and shared responsibility.
Yeah. And when you do that, compliance becomes more than just a set of rules.
Yeah.
It becomes part of who you are as a company.
Okay. I'm starting to see how compliance can actually be a good thing, not just a roadblock.
Exactly. But it's not always easy to make that shift, in how people view it.
Yeah, I get that. So how do you actually make compliance a part of the company culture instead of just being like the Department of No?
Well, I think the first thing is to start thinking about compliance as a partner, a strategic partner that helps the company achieve its goals, not just something that gets in the way.
I like that. But that's a tough sell, right? Most people still think of compliance as the fun police.
I know, so we have to change the way we talk about it. Instead of focusing on policing and enforcing rules, we need to talk about how compliance can actually add value.
How it protects the company, helps it grow, makes it more ethical and sustainable.
Right. It's about highlighting the positive impact, not just the negative consequences.
I get it.
Oh.
But how do you actually make those connections for people?
You have to know your audience. For example, if you're talking to the CEO, you emphasize how good compliance practices can attract investors. But if you're talking to, say, the sales team, you might focus on how compliance can help build trust with clients and close deals.
So you tailor the message to what people care about.
Exactly. And show them how compliance isn't just a box to check. It's a way of doing business that can actually make them more successful.
This is all really fascinating. I'm definitely seeing compliance in a new light now.
Good. Because
Cool.
there's still a lot more to unpack,
Yeah.
and we're just getting started.
Okay, I'm ready for more. Let's dive deeper. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about how you can't really shift people's perception of compliance without talking about collaboration. And I imagine that's especially important when a company's going through big changes. Like everyone's trying to figure out the new normal, and there are probably a lot more opportunities for things to go wrong.
Yeah, collaboration is key. Compliance can't just be this separate thing. It has to be woven into the whole organization. That means working closely with all the different departments, from HR to IT, legal, marketing, everyone.
So it's not about compliance officers being the police. It's about being more like partners, I guess.
Exactly. Partners, collaborators,
Yeah.
problem solvers. And when you approach things that way, it's way easier to get people on board.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say a company is implementing a new system, like a customer relationship management system, CRM.
Okay.
In the past, IT would just go ahead and pick a system, implement it. Then at the very end, they'd call in the compliance officer to make sure it meets all the, data privacy rules.
And that probably caused a lot of headaches.
Oh, yeah. Delays, frustration, the whole thing. A much better way is to involve the compliance officer right from the start.
Okay, so instead of saying no at the end, they're actually helping to choose the right system in the first place.
Exactly. They can work with IT, figure out the potential risks, make sure they pick a system that meets the company's needs, but also, Doesn't break any rules.
So it's proactive, not reactive. I like that.
And it can actually speed things up
Huh.
because you're not having to go back and fix things later.
Makes sense. But that kind of collaboration requires a lot of trust, right? Between the different departments.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why building those relationships is so important for compliance officers. Being approachable, understanding what other departments need, being willing to work together.
Sounds like a lot of communication.
It is, but it's so worth it. When you have those strong relationships, compliance becomes less of a burden for everyone.
Okay, that makes sense. We keep talking about how compliance is always changing. I can't imagine that's easy for anyone to keep up with.
Yeah, adaptability is super important.
Mm.
Compliance isn't just a set of rules that, stay the same forever. It's constantly evolving.
So you have to be willing to, change with it.
Exactly.
Mm.
Embrace change. Question the way things are done. Always look for ways to improve.
But how do you build that kind of adaptability into a company's culture?
Well, it starts at the top, right? Leaders have to set the example. They have to be willing to learn, to adapt, to take some risks.
So it's like creating an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you learn from them.
Exactly. Because let's be honest, in a fast-paced world, mistakes are going to happen. It's what you do with those mistakes that matters.
That's a good point, and I bet that applies to way more than just compliance.
Oh, yeah. Any area of business where you're trying to, be innovative and adapt to change.
Makes sense. So for compliance specifically, what does that look like?
It means being willing to, revisit your processes. Ask yourself, is this still the best way to do this?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a new technology or a new approach that would be better.
So kind of having a healthy skepticism about the way things are done.
Yeah. And being open to feedback. Compliance officers need to talk to other departments, figure out what's working, what's not, and be willing to change things as needed.
So it's almost like you're constantly experimenting with compliance, right?
It's a good way to put it because things are changing all the time. The regulations, the business world, everything. The only way to stay ahead is to be adaptable.
I like that. Okay, you mentioned scenario planning earlier. What is that exactly?
So scenario planning is basically thinking ahead, trying to anticipate the risks that might come up with, certain types of changes.
Oh, okay.
Like if a company is planning to expand internationally, there are a lot of unknowns, right? Different regulations, different cultures, maybe even political risks. So a compliance officer might use scenario planning to think through those different possibilities.
So what if this happens? Okay, what if that happens?
Right. And then coming up with plans for how to deal with each situation.
So you're prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. It's about building that resilience into your compliance program.
I can see how that would be really helpful, especially when the stakes are high.
Yeah, it's all about being proactive,
Right.
right? Thinking ahead, planning for the different possibilities, and that's what makes a really effective compliance program.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of really interesting stuff today, and I think I'm starting to see compliance in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that
Yeah.
because it really is a crucial part of any successful business.
Yeah, and I think we have even more to talk about.
We do. We've only just scratched the surface.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's really amazing how much goes into making compliance work, especially when things are changing all the time. But, we've been talking a lot about these big picture ideas, but I'd love to bring it back to our listeners and what they can actually do with all this information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be actionable, right?
So for everyone listening, think about your own workplace. How does your company deal with change? And what part does compliance play in that? Or even better, what role could it play if things were, a little different?
That's a great challenge.
Yeah.
Because things are always changing, right?
Yeah.
But how we handle that change, that's what matters.
And sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the, big strategies and policies and all that. But I think it's important to remember that change happens in, small ways, too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the everyday stuff, how we communicate, how we make decisions.
And that's why having a culture of open communication is so important.
Totally. Where people feel safe speaking up, asking questions, even, disagreeing sometimes.
Because change can be messy. There are always going to be, bumps in the road. But having that strong compliance foundation and a team that's really dedicated to doing things right, it can make all the difference.
It's not just about, avoiding fines or checking boxes. It's about creating a workplace where people actually feel good about what they're doing.
Where they know they're doing things the right way.
Exactly. And they feel supported.
I love that. So as you all head back to your own companies, remember what we talked about today. Compliance isn't this scary thing that holds you back. It's a tool that helps you move forward in a way that's both successful and ethical.
Yeah, embrace change, don't be afraid to question things, and keep learning. Because the only thing that's constant in compliance is change itself.
Well said. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive. I hope you all found it as interesting as I did. It's definitely changed the way I think about
Me
compliance.
too. And as always, we love to hear from you. So if you have any thoughts, any stories, any questions, please reach out to us.
We're on social media, we have our website, we want to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep diving deep.